Currently, there are about 300 million Americans populating the United States, but in a new book, 1 billion Americans, The Case for Thinking Bigger, author Matthew Yglesias explores the power of a more populous America.
Vox co-founder argues how a large increase in population could benefit the U.S. in the maintenance of economic dominance against China in particular, and also discusses new approaches to immigration. Author and Vox co-founder Matt Yglesias joins us now for more on his new book, 1 Billion Americans, The Case for Thinking Bigger. Great to have you, Matt. Welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Matt.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, so just make the case here. Why do you think that population growth is the key to maintaining American economic dominance?
Well, if you look at China and the sort of rise of their economic power, they've achieved a domestic economy that's about as large as ours in purchasing power parity terms, maybe will be bigger soon. And they're still only about as rich as like a Mexico or a Bulgaria. But their country is so big. There are so many Chinese people that they have incredible clout over our businesses, over our movie studios, over our athletes. And what we need to do to sort of maintain America's preeminence is, of course, we need to try to build our economy, do what we can, but we need more people. We need to take action to be smarter about immigration policy, but ultimately welcome more people, and also to do what families need to be able to have the number of kids that they say they want. Americans say they want about 2.5 children per person, but we're having 1.8, 1.7. It keeps slipping lower each year because we're making it really hard for people to form families, and we're making it really hard for people to move here legally. And these are both things we could change, and it would be, broadly beneficial. We'd be a richer, stronger country, but we'd also maintain our number one spot in the global stage.
And Matt, the immigration question aside, what I'm really interested in here is about what you're talking about there with birth rates. Now, you've done some of the work here in your book, which I've read and I find really interesting. What could we actually do here in the United States to increase America's birth rate? So many different countries have tried. I've had the Hungarian people here, talking about what they're doing. I've looked all across, Western Europe and others. A large part of these projects are just total failures. What can we actually do here?
I think what the evidence from foreign programs shows is that the biggest thing you can do is money, and particularly front-loaded money, right? So child allowance, which is something Senate Democrats have talked about mostly as an anti-poverty program, that works, that helps. But that's basically like you give cash to parents of young kids. So that helps a little bit. If you restructure that somewhat to sort of give more money up front, right? So it comes as a kind of baby bonus, that helps even more. Then we also have to look at our housing policies, right? It's if you live in a sort of big liberal city where it costs like millions of dollars to get a house, that deters family formation. And so there's changes we could make there. The other thing is marriage, right? We have a lot of marriage penalties built into aspects of our welfare state. There's something Republicans used to talk about a lot. They didn't make much headway actually getting the policies changed, and they've sort of moved on to other things. But it was a good classic conservative point that if you give people Medicaid benefits or you give them EITC benefits, and then you take those benefits away if they get married, that destabilizes family formation. And that has a really strong impact on working class families in particular.
Yeah, Matt, part of what I like about the book, frankly, is that I feel like it has something for everybody to love and also something for everybody to hate, which I kind of feel like fits your persona anyway. So it's like very
I want to emphasize
aligned.
The love.
But one of the concerns I have is, obviously we're a totally consumption-based economy. We're very energy hungry. What would 1 billion Americans do in terms of climate change?
Yeah, it's true that, the United States is a very wealthy society. We consume a lot. That includes a lot of energy consumption. Particularly if people move here from poorer countries, they get richer. That does have a negative impact on the climate. And so, we would need to accelerate the pace at which we deploy our solar panels, our electric cars, our wind turbines, upgrade our grid, all of those things. What I do think is important is that to do those things, we need to make sort of big changes in the regulatory environment. We need to make big public investments, and growth actually makes it easier to make those kinds of changes. So more growth, it does exacerbate the climate problem, but it also facilitates some of the solution.
And I guess one of the major one of the criticisms I saw, which kind of crystallized it, was not 1 billion Americans crossed out 1 billion consumers. And the way that I kind of think that crystallizes is something I asked you in our longer discussion when you were on my podcast, which was, okay, much of this seems to be around consumption power, but what about as a polity, as a nation, as a shared culture? Is it possible with that amount of imported, like new Americans plus large disparate things that we could have almost like a Europeanized society? What would that look like, Matt?
Well, so, America is already very big, right? This is just a geographically expansive country. It's a very diverse country. We have a lot of things that sort of separate us. To me, though, like our culture, our politics has become so divisive, in part because we aren't taking on any sort of big national challenges, right? And that the focus, like World War II was obviously a horrible tragedy. And the Cold War, like it was bad that people were living behind the Iron Curtain. But from the American perspective, right, the fact that we were taking on international challenges, we were taking on countries that had very different value systems from ours, helped us have a spirit of integration and see what Americans have in common. Part of why, like, this book to me was an optimistic exercise to write it is that it's a lot of thinking about problems and solutions rather than picking at the kind of scabs of cultural divisions inside the United States. And I think the current dynamic of sort of stagnation and shrinking away from big challenges, it's what leads us to this kind of obsessive focus on racial and ethnic divisions at home. Small disagreements in values get blown up into so much more. When, we look at concentration camps in Xinjiang, we look at protesters in Hong Kong getting clamped down, we see how much we have together and how much we really should and do value America and what America has to offer. And we should think about how to make this a strong country.
Yeah, I guess that's the other question is like, what you're talking about makes a lot of sense in terms of we need a sort of national galvanizing patriotic project of like, we're still number one and we're going to maintain our world global dominance. Is that actually good for the globe, though?
I mean, I think it is when you look at the alternative, right? And now, we could say maybe, Denmark is world's number one power would be nice. That's a very nice country. They got Legos and, bacon is their number one export. Everybody likes that.
Did not know that.
The United States, for all its flaws, is a much better champion of liberal values and humane values than the People's Republic of China is. And a world of close peer competition between the U.S. and China is going to be a very dangerous world for a lot of countries sort of caught in the mix. And I think, most people in the Asia-Pacific region, people in Japan, people in Australia, people in the Philippines, they want to see a strong United States, in part because, our value system is more trustworthy, and also in part because we're literally far away. But, that makes us a nice ally for the world. There's an incredible amount of disappointment with the United States right now. They see us having trouble getting our act together on coronavirus and being weird, frankly, in our relationship with traditional allies. And it's distressing to people around the world because, for better or worse, American leadership has been a source of stability in much of the world. And people would like to see us play that role effectively rather than kind of flail around or shrink from it.
And I think that's kind of the final thing I want to get with you, Matt, which is that I remember when we were talking, you were like at the beginning, when I was writing this book, I thought that, a lot of the people on the right would be obsessed with it. But now I have to deal with all these leftists who are like, actually, America's terrible. And why should we even want to make America great? That seems to be, how have you really navigated that? I mean, you just gave that answer, but how have you been having to navigate that question, kind of in intra-left dynamics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a certain strain of sourness on the left about the United States of America in public culture. At the same time, I think the fact that so many people from around the world would like to move here, right, that it becomes a divisive issue in American politics. Should we let people move here? Who should we let move? What should the terms of that be? that should send a message to Americans, right? There's actually something pretty good about this country. People, including people of color from all around the world, seek opportunities here, and they often find those opportunities when we let them. So, I think we should be more broad. We should embrace diversity. We should embrace toleration. But part of that is seeing that people want to be part of the American dream, right? And we should try to be inclusive, but we shouldn't be obsessively down on ourselves. It's an appealing system. It's an appealing place to live. People want in on this project, and we should let them. We should, open the project up to more people, but we should embrace the fact that it's something all kinds of people see value in.
And finally, Matt, while we have you, I do want to ask you your thoughts on kind of where things stand in the presidential race, because you're such a great analyst on these things. I saw you tweet, and I thought this was interesting, that what's actually remarkable is, given the insanity of 2020, that so little has actually changed in the presidential race. So if that's the case, and this is kind of where we are, how do you think that translates into how Election Day will ultimately go?
I mean, it seems like Biden will probably win. He's been up the whole time. Trump has always had this kind of edge and enthusiasm. Neither of those things have changed through the pandemic, through the George Floyd protests, through some of the violence in the law and order discourse. And I think most likely, Biden will win. And the question for Democrats is going to be, how will they govern? What will they actually do, right? Having put forward a candidate who, is not super associated with any particular ideas or strands of thinking, and an agenda that has mostly focused on the problems with Trump, it's not totally obvious to me what 2021 holds for the Democratic coalition. But from a narrow perspective, Democrats really want to beat Trump, and it seems like Biden is doing that.
Very interesting. All right, people should check out the book. They can get it Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the normal places.
Absolutely. Wherever you buy books, we've got it.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Matt, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Still to come, tensions between the U.S. and Iran continue to rise after reports of a planned terror attack on the United States, and the president may have made the situation worse after some tweets that he sent out. Friend of the show, Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute, is going to join us to break it all down, as well as that new peace deal, which is in the news. That's when Rising continues.